NLP is a discipline of learning how people regulate their thinking, their sensing, their language and their behaviour to create the results and the outcomes that they do. Now this is either going to be a notion that you buy into and subscribe to, or that you don't. Because there's going to be one of two approaches and perspectives that people take towards life. Approach number one is that we are not responsible for our results, our outcomes, or that we are responsible for our results and our outcomes in life. I mean, do you know anyone, perhaps a friend or a co-worker or a colleague, someone who just lives their life in a constant state of complaint or concern or worry about all the things that may or may not happen? The interesting thing about worry is that whilst we can worry as much as we want to about life, circumstances, politics, viruses, climate change, all of these sorts of things, there is very little that independently as standalone people we can do about any of these things, but yet we can fully control how it is that we choose to respond. We cannot control those things that happen to us, but we can control how it is that we choose to respond. And how maturely we respond to life, to circumstances, to situations is going to be determined by how disciplined we become in our learning to regulate our thinking, our sensing, our language, and our behaviour, so that we can take full responsibility for creating the kinds of results and the outcomes that we actually want. Because many people go through life just complaining about the results and the outcomes that they have that they don't want, whilst not always being willing to do something about it. Alrighty, so how flexible and loose we are in our thinking is going to be determined by how abstract we are in our thinking. And how abstract we are in our thinking is going to be determined by how rigid we are in terms of structuring and ordering our lives. Some people are just naturally ordered and structured. Other people live life more in a place of anarchy and chaos. And when we live our lives in an ordered, structured way, and I'm speaking from experience here, I do like to live my life in quite an ordered and structured fashion, we tend to struggle to relate to people who live life in a different way, perhaps less structured, less ordered. I can be honest here when I say that I sometimes find disordered people a little bit frustrating to be around. But then if I was to have a conversation with someone who lives their life in a more abstract, less ordered way, they might say that they find interacting with people who are too ordered and structured quite boring, or rigid, or stiff, or something like this. And I guess that if we want to become balanced in our perspective and our outlook on life, it's good to understand the reasons why some people might be naturally ordered and structured, and why other people might be less ordered and structured and perhaps more anarchic or chaotic, all right? Because there's a reason for everything. And whilst we might not always be able to understand the reasons why people say and do the things that they do, there always will be a reason that we will either commit to seeking to understand or we will not. Regardless of whether we're more naturally structured or abstract in our thinking, is going to be determined by how we have already been programmed. So let us break down NLP and explore what this actually is. Neuro is just simply our first assessment because we go through life assessing absolutely everything. Every interaction we have with people, we assess ourselves, how we conduct ourselves, arrive at automatic assumptions whether things are good, bad, right or wrong. And what we're comparing what we experience today to is every experience that we've had at some point in the past. All right. So our neuro part of Neuro-Linguistic Programming is our internal representations. It's the sounds, the images, it's the feelings that we have when we experience new things, or old things communicated in new ways, or we have new interactions, things like that. But neuro does not stand alone in isolation, all right? Everything's part of a process. The next stage in the process, or our process, is linguistic. It's our linguistic mapping. It's how it is that we interpret our experiences, our events. Our neuro part of Neuro-Linguistic Programming is just our first assessment. It's our initial experience. The linguistic part is then the stories that we go on to tell. This is good because, that is bad because, I like it, I dislike it. And if we're willing to go a little bit further, we can then explore programming, because the programming is all about the because. This has happened, which I like, because. This has happened, which I dislike, because. Regardless of whether you like or whether you dislike. I'm not saying that that's not important, but what I am saying is important is that you learn where it is that you've learned. The difference between what's good, what's bad, what's right, what's wrong. Because until we get clear on these things in life, we stand at risk of making some extremely unhealthy and unhelpful decisions. So programming is about our behavioural response. It's about the neurological processes we go through before responding to our experiences each day. Does that make sense? This might sound really complex, but I promise you, very, very simple. All right? If I could break this down in an even more simplistic way, we're dealing with inputs and outputs all of the time. All right? We are human beings. How we experience life is all internal, but our internal experiences is always going to be in response to all things external. You're watching me in this video right now. I am external to you, but how you're experiencing me is internal. You're responding emotionally to your first assessment of me, whether you like or dislike. You've told yourself a story, I am good because, or I am bad because of the fact that you will have already related me to some experience you've had at some point in the past. All right? You with me? So this isn't all about me. It's actually all about you. You with me? You being able to determine the difference between your inputs and your outputs and why it is that you arrive at the conclusions and the assumptions that you do. Because it's our conclusions and our assumptions that determine our behaviours. So if we want to become more effective, more efficient, more productive in life, we need to understand this process.